Hello everyone, hope you're all doing well. Just waiting for a few more people to join the stream and then we'll be getting started. Nice one. Audio good? Audio all good? Perfect. I'm reliably informed that you can all hear me, which is a great start. So welcome along today, and I hope you've been enjoying the Bristol Tech Festival so far. Today we're going to be talking about MVPs, minimum viable products, which is something I'm certainly very passionate about. Yeah, we're going to be taking a look at what they are, why they're important, and how you can use them in your startup, scale up, or even bigger business to kind of help you be innovative and launch products faster. If you've got any questions, I think there is a Q&A function within Hopin, if it's all set up correctly. So feel free to ask questions in there and I will be picking them up at the end of the talk, or if I can multitask, I'll try and do it as we go, but that's probably a bit ambitious. We're also on Twitter, so our Twitter handles are there. If you want to grab us after the talk for more questions, I'm more than happy to pick that up. So grab us on Twitter. We've also got a really good pack of resources. So we'll be sending out the slides from today. We've got a prototyping resource and also an Adobe XD wireframe pack, which we use in Studio to help us create MVPs. So if you want that, you can grab it on the link there or scan that QR code. And I'll flash that link up again at the end, so you can grab it if you want to. But yeah, without further ado, we will crack on and get started. So just before we do, just to give you a bit of background about who I am and who do I work for. So I'm the founder of Unfold. We're a digital design and development agency based in Bristol. And we work with a lot of startups, scale-ups, and innovative businesses to help them design either the first version of their product, so often a very early idea, so an MVP talking about today, or this kind of second or third version of kind of building up for scale. But the principles we're going to talk about today are very relevant, no matter what kind of stage of the life cycle of designing and building your first digital product are. So yeah, that's us, that's what we do. And today what we're going to be talking about in a bit more detail is, so MVPs, like I said, what are they and why are they important? We're going to look at prototyping for doing that and how can you do that in your design process. We're going to talk about user testing, so important as part of MVPs, and we'll talk about why. And how you can actually effectively collect that feedback. Types of MVP, really thinking about how we can be creative with going to market with an MVP and different ways we can do that. And then, of course, measuring success, working out how effective what we've done in practice actually is. So that's the plan. And then we'll have some questions at the end if anyone has it. Perfect. So what is an MVP? That's a great question. So it's a minimum viable product. So an MVP is a concept from the Lean Startup, which is a book by Eric Ries, which if you're attending this talk, you'll either have read or you really want to read. And it basically suggests that it's far more valuable to put something that is imperfect out into the world, i.e. a product, and observe how people use that product versus spending really long time perfecting something but not getting any feedback from users. So it's the idea of trying to get the most learning, or what you'd call validated learning, so truths about a product or truths about customer behavior as we can, with the least amount of effort, and by effort we mean money, resources, time spent before we make that learning. And that's kind of the key premise. So it's an incredibly effective tool for startups because you are by nature resource constrained, and you're trying out new ideas that you don't know if they're going to work. And so this is a methodology that you can use to help find out the answers to the questions and the hypotheses that you have faster. And I think this is a really good graphic for kind of explaining how to think about that as an MVP. So often people think about MVPs of how we've got in this left triangle, where it's about not producing many features. And that's true. We don't want to spend lots of time producing features or things that take a lot of effort. But the key thing to really think about is more on the right hand side, where it's about producing as much value for the customer. So giving them that minimum viable it has to be sticky, useful to people, but doing that from a very small feature set. And we're going to talk a little bit about how you might go about that in a bit. So firstly, though, why should we adopt an MVP approach? Well, I think there are three kind of key benefits that I think really why we should be using MVPs as a process for developing products. The first one is that you can learn and iterate faster. So in the startup world and in business in general, whoever is learning the most, the fastest, is generally going to win, because you've got more insight and you can provide more value for customers and iterate faster. And prototyping is a really effective method for allowing you to do that. If you keep things simple, it allows you to get things out into the world faster, less perfect perhaps, but because you're getting that feedback, you're learning quicker. The second one is that you can avoid costly mistakes. So the faster we fail or notice our mistakes, the quicker we can then fix those mistakes. The quicker we do that, the less time we spend running in the wrong direction and producing features or products which are obsolete or don't hit the mark or don't reach that kind of product market fit, if you like. And then the third one is that the user guides your direction. So we as an agency who help startups kind of produce these products, often it's kind of, we say that we don't have the solution, we don't have the answer to kind of producing a fantastic product, but we do have a really good process which helps us understand what users want, what their pain points are, and we let them decide what the product does and how it works. And that is the most effective way of creating a product, because you're being led by the people that are going to be using it, rather than necessarily our own assumptions around how people will use a product. And we'll talk a bit more about that when we're thinking about user testing and going out to market. A couple of key principles as well to think about. So the first one is that you need to be super clear who you're designing for when you're talking about MVPs. More often than not, you can fall into the temptation of designing something which is okay or good for a large group of people or a kind of subset of people, but not excellent and not really, really good, and something that people can get passionate about. And I think particularly when you're thinking about MVPs, you need to stay razor focused on producing something which is exceptional for a very small group of people, because you will learn a lot more, you'll get more engaged feedback, and you can be clearer about the type of features and the type of things that should go into that MVP, because you have a clear idea of who you're designing for. So by that, I mean, instead of saying you want to design a product for students, for example, you could say that you want to design a product for students who study engineering at a top tier uni in the US. It's a very small demographic, but actually they probably have quite a good shared set of characteristics. So being really targeted with your personas is very important when you're thinking about MVPs. And the last key principle, before we move on to talk a bit more about process and prototyping, is to make your product do one thing really well. Because if you have a really good idea of who you're designing for and have a very clear idea of the problem that they have, then you can produce a solution which is really pinpointed at solving that problem. And that's absolutely vital, again, for making something which is really sticky. You don't want to be a jack of all trades if you're producing an MVP. You want to be really focused, because when you don't have the resources of Google or Facebook, then you aren't able to solve all the problems that a person has. You need to focus in on one specifically. Cool. We shall move on and we'll talk about a little bit about what are the kind of key steps for designing an MVP. And I think there are many different versions of a diagram that looks a little bit like this. It's a product, and this is how we go about kind of producing and designing products. And I think the first thing to note is that it's circular even. So the process is very much about continuous and iterative development, rather than the project start at one end and finish with a product and launch it and you're done. We start, as you can see from the top here, by understanding the the problem and the customers. And that's absolutely crucial for you to come up with solutions. So starting by finding out about what the issues are that we want to try and solve with our MVP and understanding those customers, before then going on to an ideation phase where you're coming up with lots of ideas. So one of the key parts of our process is actually the idea that quantity of ideas in the early stages is better than the quality of ideas. We try to generate huge amounts of different variations and different ways of solving the problem that we've decided we're going to try and solve. And that really helps, because the best ideas come when you've got sort of almost half an idea from someone else and it bounces off another half idea, and suddenly things start to come together and produce kind of solutions that people hadn't thought about before. So there's a number of different activities that actually, in the prototyping guide that I mentioned at the start of the talk, which you can grab that link, there's all the activities that we do to help come up with all those ideas is in there. So would highly recommend checking that out. After that, it's all about wireframing. So even within the kind of process of producing an MVP, there are so many opportunities to get feedback and to get kind of observe how customers use your product. And wireframing is really, the first opportunity to do that. So by that we mean really low fidelity, kind of grayscale. This might even be just sketches on a piece of paper. It's just something that starts to transform your idea from a discussion down into kind of an interface or a product or something a bit more tangible. And something magic happens in that process of talking to drawing. And even if you can't draw, everyone, at least in the workshops we run, gets to draw, because it's such a great way and it's a universal language which everyone can kind of understand and relate to, and a lot less gets lost in translation when you're sharing sketches. So we go through that process. User testing, obviously, as you can see, is a massive part of that, and getting feedback from users to understand like where we're going wrong with things and what people like, because it's so much easier to change things when it's a sketch, or even if that's in XD or Figma or a kind of digital prototyping software like that. It's so much easier to change at that stage than it is once you've started to build something. So try and go through this kind of iterative step and amend and learn as much as you can. UI design is then all about bringing kind of brand and character. So up until now, we've only been concerned about how it works, and now we start to bring in how it looks. Again, trying not to put any effort into something that we're not yet confident is going to work. So we didn't do that until we're confident that the wireframes were on track in terms of product and putting it out into the world. That doesn't have coding. In fact, often the best MVPs aren't kind of custom applications, and we're going to look at those in a second. But building a product of some kind and getting it out into the world is really important. And then analyzing and finding out how that product actually works in real life. So as you can see, we then end up right back at the start, where it's about understanding that analysis and how that's going to inform the next round of ideation and where we're going to go from here. It never stops as a process, but the point is that you should try and do this whole process as quickly and as regularly as possible. Bear in mind, this is the beauty of kind of MVPs and this prototyping approach is that it to wherever you're at as a business. So if you are one person, you know this is just an idea. Going through that process of sketching stuff out and showing it to people, getting feedback is hugely valuable to kind of refining your proposition. But equally, if you already have a product out in the market, it's well established, going back and being more agile with your design and getting more feedback like this, even if that's just on a feature within that product, is going to be really helpful. So scale it to the appropriate level for you, and kind of think about it that way. Define your problem solution first. So we've touched on this already, but it's absolutely vital that you don't fall in love with a solution. We see that quite a lot, where a founder will have really passionate about the solution, but has forgotten to kind of validate whether that is solving a problem for their users. You're far more successful if you fall in love with trying to solve a particular problem, but don't become attached to the way that you solve that problem, because it's going to need to change. Because the first time you put something out into the world, it probably will be wrong, but that's the whole point. It's about being adaptive and being able to respond to the changes. So falling in love with the problem, not the solution. And then test. The whole point of an MVP is that validated learning piece. So how are you going to get feedback from users and get that kind of vital insight? Speaking of which, how do we go about user testing? So there are kind of three stages of user testing, which I'm going to talk about in a minute, but I wanted to show you the methods that we use to kind of collect information about users that we find the kind of most successful, but equally have a degree of pragmatism to them. We don't have endless or no one has endless time and resource to be able to kind of do user testing. So it's important that what we do is high value, pragmatic, and actionable, I guess, in terms of the insight that comes out of that. So there are two sort of spheres of research that we can collect: qualitative and quantitative. And you need both, if I'm honest. The qualitative, in terms of getting and actually speaking to users, is hugely valuable in terms of whether that's interviews or focus groups, and getting that information is very valuable because it helps to inform what we see in the data. Certainly if you've already got an existing product or you've launched and you're now iterating and learning from a product where you're looking to A/B test things, which is where we would kind of take two versions of the same website, for example, and serve that to half the visitors and find out which one is more effective for a particular goal. Whether we're doing session recording, so you can actually use something like Hotjar, which will help you see like how people are using the website. It's amazing. You can see people rage clicking or getting lost, and that helps us to kind of understand again how people are using the site with heat maps, etc. Google Analytics. So we do a lot of kind of e-commerce and booking journeys. So being able to see where in the funnel that like bottlenecks are appearing in terms of drop-offs is hugely useful. And then an NPS score as well is an absolutely vital metric for an MVP, which is where you ask all your customers how likely they are to recommend your service on a scale of 1 to 10. And then you actually can get a score out of the back of that, which shows you how likely you are to be referred. And that's a really common benchmark for scoring a kind of business service. So those are all the different ways you can do it. And you can see how if the data is telling you that there's a problem on a certain page because there's lots of drop-offs, you're still going to need some qualitative interviews or putting kind of a website in front of a user to be able to get feedback on that. And you need to put those two halves of information together in order to be able to then take insight into your product design process and development. So that's really important. I mentioned that there are three kind of types of user testing that we do. And I guess the first one is problem testing. So if you are right at the beginning of your journey and you don't know whether, and you're trying to find out more about users' problems and what kind of like issues they're facing. Again, when we talked about like not falling in love with a solution and falling in love with a problem, when we first start an MVP design process, the first thing we've got to do is validate whether there is a problem, not go to someone and say, I've got this solution, what do you think? So if you're selling or you're considering selling, what's a good example? A home CCTV system for cats, for example, we might ask some cat owners whether they're worried about what their cat's doing while they're out. So I'm not going in and saying, here's my shiny new product. I'm actually trying to ascertain whether people are actually worried about that. And then I might start designing my solution based around that. And that tends to be much more qualitative in terms of the kind of the methods you use to collect that information. The second one is solution testing. So once you've validated there's a problem, we need to just put forward different ways of solving that problem to the people who have identified with that problem and try to understand whether that has helped them to solve the problem. And again, depending on what stage you're at, that might be putting a wireframe in front of them, might be putting a sketch in front of them and saying, how would this work? Would this help solve your concerns about, what your cat is up to when you're at work? And yeah, kind of ascertain now more about the solution. And then the third one is kind of optimization testing. So this is where the quant stuff comes in much more because you're post-launch and you're trying to work out, okay, we've put something out in the world and we're now trying to understand it. How do we understand that data? What does it tell us about how people are using the product? And how can we tie that back to the qualitative stuff that we've learned to help iterate and improve that product? Cool. So that's user testing. The next thing I want to talk about is kind of getting creative with how you're going about MVP. So we've talked a lot about the theory. Let's have a look at how people have used MVPs in the past, some different ways that people have utilized them, and go from there. Quick swig of water. So the first type of MVP I wanted to share with you today was the landing page. It's a classic. And you'll have heard a lot about it in terms of people like Dropbox did this very early on. Dropbox, obviously a fantastic service, which allows you to sync your files from your computer to the cloud seamlessly. Very complicated to build. You can't just build that and see whether people are wanting to use it because it's going to take you a very long time and a lot of money. So what they did was created a video of how the service worked, faked it essentially, put it up on a landing page and saw whether people clicked on it. And they used that validation of actually people really want to use this to raise money and then go and build the actual product for people to use, whilst also collecting a huge number of email addresses for people who are interested in the problem. Very clever. There's a bit of an issue with this though, in the sense that we don't all have the ability to drive huge amounts of traffic to a landing page. And you get into sort of issues around what are you actually testing? Is it the effectiveness of the landing page, or is it the effectiveness of the solution? Is it the design of the landing page? And it becomes a little bit hard to actually work out what hypothesis you're actually testing in there. One of our clients, though, which is called Tracked Item, which is the Instagram account that you can see on the right of the screen there, had a really clever way of getting around this. So Tracked Item wanted to find out whether people who are doing sim racing, so like racing cars online, would be interested in a tool which would help them get better at sim racing. So they could have created a landing page and gone, here's the product. It's a tool which helps you get better at sim racing. And then, either spent a load of money trying to drive traffic to that. But actually what they did was set up an Instagram page and started posting tips about how to improve your sim racing. And they built a huge community incredibly quickly. I don't know if you can see there, but they've got about 35,000 followers. And honestly, they did that in about maybe less than 6 months, which proved that there was a huge community of really engaged people who wanted to get better at sim racing. So they validated the problem, which allowed them to then go and raise the money, which allowed them to then go and build the tool, which is going to help them solve this problem. So although it was a really clever way of zero cost, just time, effort in terms of building that community, but proving and getting some really strong validated learning for no effort at all in terms of technology building stuff, because the platform they're building is quite complicated. You don't want to just dive in and do that straight away. So I thought that was really clever, and potentially that's the next way you could think about the sort of landing page MVP as working in real life. The second one is the Wizard of Oz and the Concierge MVP. Two slightly different things. As you can probably guess, this is taken from the Wizard of Oz, and the idea is that we create an illusion where the customer sees something grand, and this service looks fantastic, and then actually us as founders are behind the curtain, pulling the levers, going a bit mad, trying to pull off this grand illusion. But it allows us to test the hypothesis. Again, thinking about that slide from earlier, where it's like, how can we do the least amount of effort in terms of building things, but for the most amount of value that comes out of the end of that? And this is a really clever way of doing that. The case study for this is Zappos. They were acquired by Amazon for £1 billion or something crazy like that. And their hypothesis was, in the early days, was, will people buy shoes online? And instead of kind of setting up, big warehouse, buying all these shoes in and setting up their online store, what they did was they went around all their local shoe shops, took photos of all the shoes, listed them online, and then saw if people wanted to buy them. And if they did, then they went down to the shoe shop, bought them, and then packaged them and sent them off. Again, removed a huge amount of which would need, but didn't need to do that straight away. You can learn about what the customers want and how they're going to interact with your online store before putting in place all that expensive infrastructure. The Concierge MVP is slightly different. It's the same kind of approach where you are the person doing all the legwork, but you allow the customers to see that. So you remove the curtain. The kind of benefit of that is that you can be more malleable. So you can to customers of what they're asking of you, and being a bit more that service. But it also is potentially less, more open to bias, because someone knows that there's someone behind the curtain, so they can take advantage of that. So different ways of thinking about it, but something to kind of bear in mind if you're thinking about using this kind of route. The third and also final type of MVP to talk about today is the piecemeal MVP. Now, the idea behind this is that you use existing tools and services, product or service. So again, it's not the final thing, but it's a very early version and a very rudimentary way of showing how your service could work. So again, a great example of this was Groupon. Obviously, now a massive website with lots of listings for like coupons, etc. But what they did was, instead of kind of building all that infrastructure to start with, they just opened a WordPress site, very basic, and listed different voucher codes that they could find around the internet and see whether people they could drive traffic to it. So that's a really, again, simple way of not spending too much money or resource before learning about how people are going to use the product, learning about how they want to use it, and then going and building it properly once you've got that validated learning. Loads of tools available to do this. Airtable, WooCommerce, Notion, MailChimp. You can put something really quite sophisticated together using lots of advanced tools. We've actually had a client who came to us who had used WordPress and Airtable as a kind of combination for a online booking service for chefs. They had got really good traction using something very rudimentary, and then we helped them build the next kind of version of that product, a custom one. And they've just raised £1 million. Also were featured on Dragon's Den, got investment from Peter Jones nonetheless. So do check out Why Hungry if you're after a private chef in London. And yeah, so those are the kind of 3 different ways, and hopefully that gives you some ideas about how you can be really smart with your approach to MVP and how that can work in practice. Lastly, then, but not least, before we wrap up, so measuring success is the most important part. Is how do we measure success? And we talked about the kind of user testing, but what do we actually need to show? So typically, if we're thinking about the startup game, then it's about proving to your investors what they need to see in order to make their first investment or their next investment. So you need to have an open dialogue about what it is that the product needs to demonstrate. Is that traction? Is that basket size? Is that number of customers? Is it repeat orders? Is it getting down your CPA? What are the kind of key factors that we need to demonstrate with this MVP? So it's vital to kind of understand those and have those at the start of the process so that you can design a product which is built around achieving those objectives, because for each one will have slightly different connotations for how you then go about building the product or designing the product. So think about that very closely. Think about also what time period you're going to need to see results in. It's important to be realistic about what you can achieve with an MVP and what time frame you need to see those results in. And yeah, being realistic about that. So consider that when you're setting your targets and your objectives. And then lastly, not leastly, if you've already got an existing product, you've thought about what the objectives are that you need to achieve. Do you need like optimization? Can you develop what you already have into to the point where you will achieve the objectives you need? Or do you need radical change? Do you need to make a step change, a big pivot in order to make that difference? So yeah, some food for thought in terms of kind of measuring success and different things to consider. We are pretty much there now. So if you have any questions, do ask them in the Q&A, and I can pick those up. Or if not, we're happy to kind of pick conversations up after the talk. But in terms of today, what we've talked about, MVPs help us to kind of learn faster with a lot less effort. So thinking about how much value we can produce from being smart about where we're spending our time and our money. Doing is better than talking. We want to be observing things in the real world, not just talking about them. So always start doing rather than just discussing. Scale your approach to suit you, depending on how big your business is and what stage you are at. Do one thing well for the user and know your problem. And then last but not least, get creative with how you test products. Different approaches to that. We talked about a few today, but there are lots of different ways to approach that. So have a think about how you can do that. Which just leaves me to say thank you very much for tuning in. Really, really appreciate you joining us today, and I hope you have a fantastic rest of the festival. For anyone who is at the Sparkies on Thursday night, looking forward to seeing you all there. Should be a good one. Perfect. Cool. I'm going to give it a couple of minutes. We'll stick around for questions, but nothing coming through at the moment, which may or may not be the tech. Oh, no, there are loads of questions. Hang on. To find the right tab. That always helps, doesn't it? Popular. Here we go. Someone says thanks. Cool. First question then. If I click tick, what happens? Does that come available? I think it does. Starting out, is the approach possible, and is it possible about this in an affordable way? I think that's the whole sort of premise of the MVP, is that it's the way to go if you don't have the funds to do that. And you do have to be smart. You have to be creative in the way that you go about that. But that's the whole point. So how can you find ways to test what you need to learn in order to get to the next stage? I think that's the key question you need to ask yourself. So if you're if you're right at the beginning of that journey and you don't have any funds to be able to kind of approach that, then you need to think about, if I just need to test the hypothesis, how can I do that? Do I need to go out and ask 10 people who are potential customers of mine whether this is something they're interested in, or do they have that problem that I'm interested in solving? Because if you can build a case around that, that's when you can start to potentially get more funding, or start to piece together something like we talked about with that piecemeal MVP. What products can I use that are out there already to start simulating my product? So hopefully that helps. That question is, this is a good one. Is taking ideas from your competitors an easier, quicker way to get an idea of which features to include? Oh, I love it. Yes and no. Bigger businesses, so any Amazon, Facebook, they have spent huge amounts of money trying to and learning from customers, and they obviously have a huge amount of data and insight. And as a kind of a competitor to that, someone who was trying to do something in a similar space or in a different space, I would be foolish not to take some of that on board and find out, whether those features could be really useful. It could cut a lot of learning time for us. So I think that's really, really good. Where you need to be wary, though, is we don't want to build the same thing as them, because we're not going to compete with Amazon in that space if we just try and copy them. We have to think about what is going to be novel for us, but particularly what's different about the customers that you're targeting, why they're going to want to use you. So what's their particular problem? Why is that not being fulfilled by the existing competitors? And how are you going to be different? So absolutely take learnings from everyone else in terms of what's being used and what's valuable, but also remember that we need to be different, that we're solving a different problem, and that we are targeting a different group of people. So that's yeah, it's a tricky one. So yes, sometimes, but don't take it too far and end up producing something which is exactly the same. We've got that. We've got, what's the next one? Let's have a look. What is the best way to recruit more users when you are an idea stage startup with no resources? I'm going to take a glass of water. No resources to compensate for their time, and personal network is limited to only a few relevant target users. Yeah, that's a really tricky one. What is the best way to recruit? So Track Titan, the Instagram example we showed, was a really good one. I don't know whether your idea is B2C, so it might be that you're going B2B, which makes it trickier. But in terms of B2C, creating a community, creating a page like that was a really good way of overcoming that and trying to find out more from users and understand how they use what problems they're facing and getting feedback that way. But if it's B2B, then it is trickier because those people are harder to reach. There's often more kind of doors to get through. So I guess my advice would be, where can you go and find those people? So can you go to a networking event such as Bristol Tech Festival and find those people? So think about where the groups of people that you want to speak to are hanging out, and just go and, bump into them at a meetup and start asking them questions. People are generally quite friendly and open, especially in Bristol. Founders groups like Southwest Founders is a brilliant place to get feedback and share ideas in a kind of friendly and supportive space. So yeah, seek out where those people are hanging out, and then go and hang out in the same space. We've got another question here. As an idea stage startup with no resources to compensate testers for their time, what is the best way to recruit A testers? Okay, so similar question to the one before. So hopefully that has been answered. And actually, Monty has sent through a very useful link, which is something I haven't included. So thank you, Monty, for sending that, which is usertesting.com. So if I approve that, hopefully that will go through. So usertesting.com is one of a few different services which does remote user testing. I think usertesting.com is one of those. But you can use, I think we use UserBrain, which is a website which you can basically, for instance, upload a prototype to and pay a certain amount. So I think there is a fee to it, or they might give you a certain amount for free, where they'll get people to then put that in front of people, and they'll complete a test and give you some feedback on. If you are an existing business as well and you want to introduce user testing on a more regular basis, because you can sort of set it as part of your weekly agenda of running one test a week and getting feedback on that on a routine basis, and it helps to keep you closer to customers and closer to products. So that's really good. If you're an even bigger business, I can also recommend People for Research, another Bristol-based agency which helps you actually recruit user testing participants. But again, that's probably for more established businesses with a budget to do so. I think, let's have a look. Best way to recruit. I'm trying to make sure we haven't missed anyone. I think that's everyone. Sorry, which one do we use? We use, let me find the link. Is it UserBrain? I'm going to just Google this. Yes, userbrain.com. I don't know if I can, I don't know how I'd actually get this. Can I ask a question? I'm going to ask a question and then approve that, and hopefully you can now see that. Yes, there you go. So hopefully you can use that. That one's quite good. We found that of all the ones that we kind of considered using, that was the best one in terms of finding the demographic people. It gave us some control over that, but it was also like the most affordable. So I think we went with it on a pricing basis as well. It was a good balance of the two, because a lot of the websites like UserBrain are very enterprise focused, which means they get very expensive even for sort of scale up size businesses very quickly. So yeah, hopefully that's answered that one. I'm going to give a couple of minutes just in case anyone else has got another question that they are typing out, but hopefully that has been a useful session for everyone. And I can stop sharing my screen. Yeah, and like I say, though, if anyone does have any other questions, you can find us on Twitter, Made by Unfold. And that's also our website, madebyunfold.co. I'm on Twitter as @HarryCobbold. So if you've got any questions, I'll post this, then feel free to reach out. Otherwise, I hope you guys have a wonderful rest of your day, wonderful rest of the festival, and we'll catch you next time. Thank you so much.